When a woman becomes his karmic lesson, Carl Jung, you will think it's just heartbreak. But it isn't. It's karma disguised as love. You'll think it's an ending. But in truth, it's initiation. You see, when a woman walks into a man's life carrying both her softness and her power, something ancient awakens in him. She doesn't arrive to complete him, nor to fix him. She arrives as the mirror, the one he didn't know he was asking for. The kind of mirror that reflects not the image he shows the world, but the shadows he's been running from. If a man has not yet faced himself, she becomes the lesson. Her love becomes the light that exposes his wounds, his projections, his false gods of control and pride. The moment he meets a woman who sees through the mask, his ego trembles, because now he cannot hide. Every man carries a part of the divine feminine within him, the anima, Jung called it, the inner woman he must learn to understand if he is ever to love a real one. But when that inner feminine has been neglected, suppressed, or distorted, he will project her onto a living woman. He will love her not for who she is, but for who he wishes himself to be through her. He will try to possess what he does not yet know how to honor. And when she no longer plays the role of his fantasy, he feels betrayed, not by her, but by the illusion breaking inside him. The karmic lesson begins here. Because karma is not punishment. Karma is repetition. It is the psyche's relentless effort to awaken through pain what comfort failed to teach. For the woman, this encounter can feel both sacred and shattering. She senses the pull of something deeper than romance, something fated. The connection feels like recognition, as if souls remember what the mind cannot. Yet soon, what seemed like destiny begins to ache. The same intensity that once felt like home now burns like fire. His fears become hers to carry. His silence turns into her mirror. And in trying to hold him, she begins to lose herself. But she was never meant to save him. She was meant to awaken him, and in doing so, awaken herself. Because the karmic bond is not about staying, it's about seeing. Seeing where one has confused love with attachment, care with sacrifice, giving with losing oneself. Many women believe that if they love deeply enough, a man will transform. But transformation cannot be borrowed, it must be chosen. A woman can inspire growth, but she cannot replace a man's inner work. When she tries, she becomes exhausted, feeding a void that only shadow work can fill. The man, on his end, may resist. His ego fights to maintain control, unable to bear the reflection of his own unhealed parts. He may withdraw, blame, or seek escape in another woman, only to meet the same story again, because the mirror always returns until the lesson is learned. For him, she is the karmic teacher disguised as temptation, the one who calls him to the battlefield of his own psyche. And for her, he becomes the catalyst for her own rebirth, the point where she must choose between shrinking to be loved or expanding to be free. In this dance of projection and awakening, both souls are being sculpted. The woman learns to anchor in her worth, to no longer beg for recognition. The man learns that control is not strength, that love demands surrender, not to another, but to truth. And when she finally stops chasing what already wounded her, when she stands still in her own light, something miraculous happens. He begins to see. He sees that the love he sought to dominate was the very love that could have liberated him, if only he had been willing to meet her as an equal. This is the moment karma completes its circle, when both realize that the lesson was never about each other, but about themselves. He was meant to see the woman within him. She was meant to reclaim the man within her. And as they part, whether in peace or in silence, a higher order is restored. Because not every soul connection is meant to last. Some are meant to awaken. Some to break open. Some to burn everything false so that something true can rise. When a woman becomes his karmic lesson, she embodies the storm that purifies the air, fierce, necessary, and unforgettable. She is not his punishment. She is his mirror. And when he finally learns to face what he once feared, he will remember her not as the one who hurt him, but as the one who set him free. When the storm of a karmic connection passes, there is always silence. It is not peace, not yet, but the silence before rebirth. The woman stands at the edge of herself, her heart split between the ache of what was lost and the strange relief of what has ended. She has spent months, perhaps years, carrying a love that became a mirror of her own wounds. Now, she begins to see it for what it was, not a failure, but an awakening. Carl Jung wrote that what we do not make conscious returns as fate. And this is the essence of karmic love, two souls unconsciously reenacting the stories they have refused to face. He attracts her because she embodies what he has denied. She is emotion, intuition, chaos, life. She attracts him because he carries what she has forgotten: structure, logic, detachment, control. In the beginning, these opposites create fire. But soon, that same fire becomes the forge in which both must transform. He mirrors her longing for validation. She mirrors his fear of vulnerability. Together, they become actors in a play written by the unconscious, a play about shadow and projection. The shadow is everything one refuses to acknowledge: the anger, the jealousy, the need, the weakness. When they fall in love, the shadow awakens. He begins to see in her what he cannot stand in himself. Her independence threatens him because it mirrors his own lack of freedom. Her emotional depth unsettles him because it reveals how shallow his connection to his feelings truly is. And for her, his withdrawal, his silence, his distance, these pierce an ancient wound, the one she carries from the beginning of time, the feeling of being unseen. She tries harder, gives more, hoping that her love will heal him. But every attempt only deepens the wound, because what she truly seeks is not his love, but her own recognition. The karmic bond is cruelly tender. It promises transcendence but delivers lessons. It calls forth the goddess in her, only to test whether she will use her power or give it away. And each time she bends herself to be chosen, she drifts further from her essence, until the pain itself becomes the teacher. Eventually, she must face the truth she has long resisted: love is not meant to cost her her soul. The kind of love that asks her to shrink is not love, but bondage. And so, slowly, she begins to detach, not out of anger, but out of awareness. She stops explaining herself to someone who has already decided not to understand. She stops waiting for an apology that will never come. She stops trying to rescue someone who enjoys his own cage. This is the first moment of true awakening, when she chooses herself without the need to be chosen by him. At first, this feels like death. Because for a woman who has lived through her empathy, boundaries feel like cruelty. But she learns, as all wise women do, that boundaries are not walls, they are sacred gates. They keep out what does not honor her energy, and they preserve the love that remains for herself. Meanwhile, the man she leaves behind faces his own reckoning. When the mirror disappears, he is left alone with his reflection. No one is there to absorb his pain or reflect his potential. His usual distractions, work, conquest, validation, no longer satisfy. He begins to feel the emptiness he once projected onto her. And it is in that void that transformation can begin. Because when a woman becomes his karmic lesson, she awakens the buried feminine within him, the anima he has long denied. She forces him to meet the emotion he fears, the tenderness he mocks, the vulnerability he rejects. If he resists, he repeats. If he surrenders, he evolves. In this way, her departure becomes his initiation. The loss he thought would destroy him becomes the mirror that saves him, but only if he dares to see. And for her, the freedom she feared becomes her rebirth. The silence that once terrified her becomes sanctuary. She begins to hear her own voice again, unfiltered, unbroken. This is where she starts remembering who she was before the projection. Before being someone's lesson, she was her own. The divine feminine reclaims her throne, not as a queen who needs a king, but as the embodiment of wholeness itself. Because a woman who has faced her karmic bond has walked through fire. And from that fire, she no longer emerges desperate for love, she becomes love itself. As she rises from the ashes of that karmic fire, she begins to see with new eyes, eyes that no longer look outward for validation but inward for truth. The world around her has not changed, but her vision has. The illusions that once held power over her, the idea that she must earn love, that she must be enough for someone to stay, begin to dissolve, one by one, like fog under the morning sun. This is the sacred aftermath of awakening, the quiet rebuilding of the self. It is not glamorous. It is not loud. It is the slow return to authenticity, the rediscovery of the woman who exists beyond roles and expectations. The woman who no longer measures her worth by who chooses her, but by how deeply she chooses herself. Carl Jung spoke of individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating all parts of oneself, the light, the shadow, the masculine, the feminine. This is where she now stands. For so long, she gave her power to the projection, to the man who symbolized her unhealed inner masculine, the part of her that sought direction, security, and approval from outside. Now, she learns to embody it within. The feminine within her is not weak, nor endlessly forgiving. She is intuitive and fierce. She is softness without submission, compassion without self-erasure. And the masculine within her, the inner protector, begins to awaken as well. He guards her boundaries, honors her truth, and holds her steady in her self-respect. Together, they create inner union. This is the true end of karma, not revenge, not closure from the other, but integration within the self. When she embodies both her inner man and her inner woman, she becomes whole. There is nothing left for the outside world to complete. And that is when life itself begins to respond differently. Because the energy she once spent chasing validation now radiates as self-assurance. The love she once begged for she now carries effortlessly. People sense it without her needing to say a word. There is something magnetic about a woman who no longer performs. She doesn't manipulate, she doesn't convince, she simply is. But make no mistake, this peace did not come without war. To become this woman, she had to confront the darkest corners of her psyche. She had to meet her own shadow, the one who tolerated disrespect, who called chaos love, who mistook pain for passion. She had to look her inner wounded girl in the eyes and whisper, "You don't have to prove your worth anymore." This act, the quiet reclaiming of the self, is more radical than any rebellion. Because the world benefits from women who doubt themselves. The systems of power, both social and personal, depend on her forgetting who she is. When she remembers, she becomes untouchable. And yet, this remembrance does not make her hard. Quite the opposite. True power is not resistance, it is rootedness. She no longer fights to be understood, she simply lives in alignment. She no longer seeks to control outcomes, she trusts in divine timing. She no longer fears being alone, she recognizes solitude as sacred ground. Meanwhile, somewhere in his own solitude, the man she once loved begins to feel the weight of her absence, not just her physical presence, but her energy. The reflection she once held for him is gone, and in its place stands emptiness. For the first time, he begins to see himself not through the lens of admiration or desire, but through truth. If he is willing, he will start his own descent into the shadow he has long denied. He will realize that the pain he once blamed on her was the pain of meeting himself. The karmic loop will end not when he finds another woman to replace her, but when he finds the parts of himself he abandoned long ago. And if he does, something miraculous may occur, not reunion in the old sense, but recognition. Two souls, once bound by karma, may meet again, not to repeat, but to witness. No longer mirrors of unhealed wounds, but equals who see each other clearly, without projection, without need. This is the possibility that awaits when both walk the path of individuation. But even if their paths never cross again, the lesson remains eternal. No love is wasted if it brings you closer to yourself. Because every karmic connection, no matter how painful, is an invitation from the universe to rise, to awaken, to remember. And when a woman finally answers that call, she becomes something extraordinary, a force of nature who belongs to no one, yet moves through the world as if everything belongs to her. Not from arrogance, but from oneness. Not from pride, but from peace. There comes a time when a woman who has walked through her own fire begins to live differently. Her energy changes. Her silence deepens. She no longer rushes toward intensity or chases after validation. The world feels slower, softer, and for the first time, she doesn't confuse peace with boredom. She has tasted chaos and learned that it was never love, it was hunger disguised as destiny. The thrill of being chosen by someone emotionally unavailable no longer excites her. The drama that once felt intoxicating now feels heavy. Her nervous system, once addicted to adrenaline and longing, now craves calm. That is how you know she has evolved. In Jungian terms, she has integrated the shadow of her feminine, the part that once sought to please, to fix, to prove her worth through suffering. The woman who used to pour herself into others now pours into her purpose. She no longer waits for someone to recognize her value, she lives it. And as she changes, the universe rearranges itself around her. The kind of men she attracts shift too, because energy does not lie. When she was unhealed, she called in mirrors of her own pain, men who could not stay, men who needed saving, men who reflected her own unworthiness. Now, she calls in mirrors of her peace, men who can meet her at eye level, who are not intimidated by her power because they have met their own. But more importantly, she no longer needs them to validate her. She welcomes connection, but not as completion, as collaboration. She doesn't give her love to heal, she gives it to share. This is what Carl Jung called wholeness, the meeting point between consciousness and the unconscious, between the masculine and the feminine within. It's not about perfection, it's about balance. For the woman who becomes a man's karmic lesson, this balance was always her destiny. Her pain was never punishment, it was preparation. Every heartbreak was a refining flame, every goodbye a sacred initiation. She had to lose herself to remember the truth, that her worth was never negotiable. You might think her heart would close after all that pain. But the opposite happens. Her heart opens wider, but differently. It no longer opens blindly. It opens with discernment, an act of wisdom, not desperation. She now knows that not everyone who can reach her deserves to keep her. In this awareness, she walks differently. There's a quiet power in her presence, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. She smiles without performing, loves without losing herself, gives without expectation. And though life will still test her, she no longer crumbles when things fall apart. She has met the void before, and found herself inside it. Meanwhile, the man who once saw her as a lesson now carries her presence in his soul like a sacred echo. At first, he might have tried to replace her, to drown the memory of what she awakened in him. But eventually, every distraction fails. No one mirrors him the way she did. No one challenges him to grow the way she did. Because she wasn't meant to be the one who stays. She was meant to be the one who awakens. And though he may never admit it, she changed the trajectory of his life. Her presence forced him to confront the very parts of himself he wanted to avoid, the shame, the inadequacy, the fear of true intimacy. If he takes the lesson, he begins his own transformation. If he resists, life will send him another mirror until he learns. That is the law of the soul, repetition until awakening. For her, there is no bitterness left. She does not hate him, nor does she romanticize what was. She simply sees. She sees that he was both her mirror and her messenger. Through him, she learned her own strength. Through her love for him, she discovered what love actually is, and what it isn't. And so, she thanks him in silence. Not with words, not with contact, but with her freedom. Because forgiveness is not about forgetting, it's about releasing the energetic bond that kept her tied to the lesson. She moves forward now, not as the woman who suffered, but as the woman who knows. The karmic cycle has ended. The fire has done its work. What remains is gold, wisdom, clarity, radiance. And in that stillness, she finally understands what all of it was for. To remember that love was never meant to break her. It was meant to bring her back home to herself. Now, in the sacred calm that follows her awakening, the woman stands rooted in her own essence. The noise of seeking has faded. The ache of proving has dissolved. What remains is an inner stillness that feels almost divine, the peace that only comes after one has met every version of herself and refused to abandon any of them. She understands now that her journey was never about finding love in another, but about remembering the love that has always lived within. The karmic man, the pain, the longing, they were all instruments in her symphony of awakening. They forced her to see the fractures in her own self-worth, to confront the inner child who once whispered, "Maybe if I love enough, they'll stay." But she no longer bargains for love. She no longer confuses attachment with destiny. The Jungian path of individuation has led her here, to a place where she no longer seeks completion, because she is whole. Her feminine energy, once overextended and wounded, now flows in balance with her inner masculine, soft yet strong, receptive yet anchored. There is a sacred neutrality about her now. She doesn't chase, she doesn't run. She allows. She knows that what is truly aligned will meet her halfway. This is the essence of divine femininity, magnetism without manipulation, grace without surrendering her truth. And this is where her karmic purpose reveals its highest meaning. When a woman becomes a man's karmic lesson, she isn't merely his awakening, she is also the embodiment of divine justice. Not in the vengeful sense, but in the cosmic one. Through her, the universe restores balance. The energies he once took for granted now stand before him in silence, no longer pleading, no longer performing. Her absence becomes the consequence his soul must reckon with. Yet she holds no malice. Her lesson was never about revenge, but about release. Because true power never seeks to hurt, it simply withdraws. And when love is withdrawn from where it was not honored, it becomes the most potent form of karma there is. She now carries herself differently. Her voice has depth. Her eyes hold the weight of galaxies. She walks as one who has seen both the shadow and the light, and made peace with both. This is what Jung meant when he said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." She has done precisely that. She has turned her pain into perception, her heartbreak into higher consciousness. Her aura radiates a message that only those who have truly lived can understand. I am no longer impressed by intensity. I am moved by consistency. And so the world begins to mirror her transformation. Opportunities appear not as distractions, but as extensions of her authenticity. Relationships approach not as rescues, but as reflections of her equilibrium. She no longer mistakes chemistry for compatibility, or emotional highs for love. She knows now that love is steady, calm, reciprocal, not something that consumes, but something that expands. If she meets him again, the man who once called her his karmic storm, she will not see him with bitterness, nor nostalgia. She will simply see him as part of her myth, one chapter in the story of her becoming. She will thank him silently, not because he gave her joy, but because he gave her truth. And truth, once revealed, cannot be unseen. He, too, may have changed. The echo of her absence may have led him to his own awakening. He may now understand what she meant, what she carried, what she offered that he could not yet receive. Perhaps he has begun to integrate his own anima, to listen to the voice within that sounds suspiciously like hers, compassionate, wise, unyielding. But whether they cross paths again or not is irrelevant. The karmic thread between them has already been severed. What remains is spiritual clarity, the awareness that love, in its highest form, is never possession. It is liberation. This is the final alchemy, the transmutation of pain into power, of longing into wisdom. She has become what Jung called the realized self, the union of opposites, the reconciliation of all her inner worlds. Now, she does not chase purpose. She embodies it. She does not seek peace. She radiates it. And she no longer looks to the world for validation, the world looks to her for guidance. Because when a woman truly becomes her own karmic completion, she stops revolving around anyone else's orbit. She becomes the sun, warm, steady, sovereign. Everything that belongs to her simply gravitates back in divine timing. And in that radiant calm, she understands one final truth. The love she wanted from him was never meant to be given by another. It was always the love she was born to give herself. The cycle ends here, not in heartbreak, but in ascension. The woman who knows her worth does not chase. She chooses.